Alright, here we go. Buckle up, people, because today we are going to be talking about the science and physics and metaphysics of heaven, of other dimensions, of the multiverse, and it's going to be good stuff. Now, a point that I want to make that's pretty interesting before I get into all of this is that a lot of the theories that I'm going to be talking about and bringing up are actually Christians and apologists' arguments for the existence of God. But an even more interesting fact is they are also reasons that he may not exist. So all of this vlog comes from the question, does a supernatural realm exist? And this was a question that I had years ago, and this led me on this journey of finding out all of this information that I'm going to share with you today. So in order to get to some sort of philosophical conclusion of whether or not there is a supernatural realm, we need to look at the science of it. And in order to look at the science from a whole picture, to get a full context, we need to start at the beginning. And a question to ask while we're at the beginning, which is something that maybe some of you haven't even thought of, is what is the problem scientifically and religiously with just having a universe? Why do we need another realm? Why do we need a supernatural realm for both science and religion? And on top of that, while we're at the beginning, let's already get into some controversy here. The beginning to theists is the creation of God speaking, let it be, and it is, and the creation to atheists is the Big Bang. Now, obviously, there's some middle ground there with old Earth creationists and some Christians that believe in evolution and all that sort of thing. So we already reach a sort of dilemma right at the beginning of this thing. So scientifically speaking, the Big Bang could explain our theory of the universe. But then we enter into this sort of chain of thinking, and theists have also used this as evidence that God exists. The Big Bang Theory supports the fact that our universe is finitely old, and a finitely old universe supports theism, that there was a creation, which supports the claim that God exists. So how do we win the battle here between faith and science? Well, the answer is actually a multiverse. Well, it could be the answer. So why is it that physicists and scientists want a multiverse? And why is it that religious people do as well? Well, with religious people and religious doctrines, it's pretty obvious. If there is a multiverse, then that gives some sort of scientific basis that there is a heaven. But why does science want a multiverse? So here's why. And all these scientists that I'm going to mention have really been on this hunt for the theory of everything, which is one scientific fact, one scientific equation that definitively says that this is the foundation of the creation, evolution of our entire everything that we know of. So as far as I know, the hunt for this really starts with Isaac Newton, which, as a lot of you know, Isaac Newton came up with the 3 laws of gravity, and he figured out the effect of gravity and how to measure it, but he didn't actually figure out how it worked. And he actually admitted this, that he could tell how gravity affected us, but he didn't know or understand how it worked. Like, how can gravity move across space? And then cue Einstein. And Einstein's special theory of relativity proved how gravity and time works, and that the medium which transmits the two is space itself. So in finding the special theory of relativity, Einstein was really the first to propose that instead of thinking of these equations in a 3-dimensional space, that we should think about them in a 4-dimensional space called space-time. And as everyone, I'm sure, knows, 3 dimensions, which is up, down, left, right, forward, backward, but he proposed that we should look at things in a 4-dimensional space, which is basically those 3 dimensions and then the one other dimension of time. Before this, time wasn't really seen as a dimension, but then he proposed that they are one and the same thing, called space-time. So he kind of was the first to say that time is its own dimension, but that wasn't really what he set out to do. So it was kind of a side effect of his work. But since then, people have looked at his work, and now time is known as the 4th dimension, even though there are some scientific difficulties with calling time the 4th dimension. It is still known as the 4th dimension. So then comes in a guy named Theodore Kaluza, who is also in search of this theory of everything. So what he tried to do is find the equations for the electromagnetic force. And there are other known forces other than the electromagnetic force, but at the time that was the only one that we had discovered, or that we were aware of. So going back to Einstein, Einstein figured out his special theory of relativity with 3 dimensions and 1 dimension of time, so 4 dimensions, 4D. And Kaluza wanted to figure out an equation that combined the electromagnetic equation with the special theory of relativity. So knowing that Einstein, what he did was basically figure out the equations in a 4-dimensional space, 3 dimensions that we can see, and the 1 extra dimension of time, Kaluza said, okay, I can play that same game. So he took the equations for the electromagnetic force and did all the math to it, but instead of using 3 spatial dimensions, he added 1 and did it with 4 spatial dimensions and 1 time. So 5 dimensions. And he was thinking that the electromagnetic waves curve in a theorized 4th dimension. And lo and behold, the equations worked out. The numbers added up to the numbers that equaled the electromagnetic force. But this only worked in the equations with 5 dimensions, 4 spatial dimensions, and 1 of time. So this posed questions. Where are the other dimensions? I mean, these equations clearly pan out, they clearly work, but where is this 4th spatial dimension that we can't see? And then in 1926 comes in Oscar Klein, who proposed this idea about the dimensions and where they might be. So if you imagine a wire, and if you look at that wire, it looks like a 2-dimensional space. But if you are as small as an ant can crawl on top of that wire, he can go on the side of that wire, he can go underneath of that wire. And to us, it looks 2-dimensional, but if you're small enough, then it is a multi-dimensional space. So the 3 dimensions are the ones that we see, the up, down, left, right, forward, backward. But there are also other spatial dimensions that we cannot see to the naked eye within these spaces. And we can't see these other dimensions unless we are, hypothetically speaking, an ant. And these other dimensions are microscopic in the depths of space itself. So Einstein, Kaluza, and Klein all tried to find this unified theory of everything, combining basically all these foundations of physics and combining them into the one equation that would govern the laws of our entire universe. They didn't crack it, and in the 40s and 50s, this stuff kind of, the search for the theory of everything just kind of went stagnant. Until today, and then in comes string theory. So basically, string theory says that if you go to the subatomic levels of our universe, which is basically atoms, and in the atoms are protons and neutrons, and inside of these are similar particles called quarks. And then in the past, that's where science has really stopped, but string theory goes even further and says that inside of these quarks are tiny little filaments that look like strings, that look like vibrating strings that are the foundations of our universe. And these strings are like these little circular strings, theoretically, that are vibrating and that really cause everything to exist. I mean, it's the foundation of our universe, and it just has this sort of, I've heard it said that it's this cosmic symphony, that our whole universe is based off these vibrations that, you know, create music. And I kind of like that idea. I think that's a pretty cool idea, cosmic symphony. It sounds like a really cool album name. Noted. So theoretically, this could possibly be the theory for our universe that describes everything. It could describe the origins of our universe, it could describe the beginning, it could describe everything. String theory will take care of it all. But here's the catch, and here's the very interesting catch that ties this whole chain of events together, is that string theory does not work in a space with 3 dimensions, or 4 dimensions, or 5 dimensions, or 6, or 7, or 8, or 9. It only works in a space with 10 dimensions and 1 of time. So basically 11D. String theory only works, the equations only work out if there are 11 other dimensions. But where are these other dimensions? We still haven't found these other dimensions. So besides the multidimensional thing, how does this all tie in with a multiverse? So in order to answer that question, you have to know of something called the Anthropic Principle, which basically says there are a series of numbers that define our universe. And I think Brian Greene, who's a physicist, said that it's about 20 numbers that describe our universe to the precise decimal point and detail. And if any of these numbers were screwed up in any sort of way, the universe wouldn't exist. We wouldn't exist. Life wouldn't exist. The universe would not be. And scientists actually call this the fine-tuning problem because they can't figure out why that is. Obviously, Christians look at that and they say, well, it is intelligent design. It is teleology. And scientists look at this and they're like, this is a problem. We cannot figure this out. Now, it has been theorized in string theory that the shape of these other dimensions, which kind of, if you watch videos on this stuff, it kind of looks like a sphere, that these other dimensions that we can't see are shaped with these mathematical equations that use the Anthropic Principle, that use the numbers of our universe. So using the numbers in the Anthropic Principle, they have tried to calculate the shape of these other dimensions. And on these other dimensions, that's how they assume that the strings vibrate on these dimensional playing fields and they use the numbers from the Anthropic Principle to determine the shape of that. But no one has been able to calculate the shape of the other dimensions using the numbers from the Anthropic Principle, mainly the number of the amount of dark energy in our universe, which leads to the idea of the multiverse. If there wasn't just our universe, if there was other universes out there, if we were just one in a plethora of multiverses, then all of those other multiverses would have different laws of physics, would have a different anthropic principle. So these strings and these multi-dimensions wouldn't just make up our universe, they would make up the multiverse. And so we can't use our anthropic principle to try to crack the code of how these dimensions are shaped, because there's other universes that are also made by these said strings in string theory, in these other dimensional planes. So if this is correct, then it would just be assumed that our universe, why there is life in our universe, is it was just by accident, because it just so happened that the multiverse birthed this universe, that the conditions were just perfect for life, and every other multiverse out there has different laws of physics that are not perfect for life, that life wouldn't exist. So obviously one explanation for our universe is God, but the necessity for God goes away with a multiverse, because then we weren't created. There was no intelligent design. It was that we just happened in the multiverse. And there's this quote by Bernard Carr that I want to read, and he's a mathematician and astronomer at the Queen Mary in London. So he says, if you don't want a God, you better have a multiverse. So God and the multiverse are both answers to the question, where did our universe come from, and why is the universe the way that it is? So the dire need to really find another world, find another universe to prove the multiverse, is in a sense completely atheistic. And obviously one could argue that God created the multiverse, but the necessity for a God goes away with the multiverse. So the multiverse doesn't disprove that God exists, but it does say by scientific standards that if God created the multiverse, then our universe, by scientific standards, was an accident. And so there are so many theories of the multiverse and how, because obviously we haven't found these multiverses yet. So I'm going to try to, as quickly as I can, run through these theories. So the first theory is called universe islands, or the quilt theory, which basically says our universe is expanding, and so the other universes might be expanding as well, and we're all these universes side by side, and they're all constantly expanding, and sooner or later we're going to run into each other. We're going to run into another universe. And then there is the inflation, the bubbleverse multiverse theory, that our universe is expanding, and so some areas are expanding more than others, and those others expansions are other universes, like black holes would be the birth of another universe, and that's a theory by Stephen Hawking as well. And then there's cosmic natural selection, which basically says that there's all these other universes, but our universe was the one that made it for life, because our universe, it just said, no, this doesn't work, no, this doesn't work, no, this doesn't work. All these universes were birthed out of black holes, like this theory by Stephen Hawking, and that ours was favored because it was the one that was just perfect enough for life. And then there's the theory for the brain multiverse, which instead of saying that there are other multiverses out there, that there's actual other universes stacked on top of each other. And this is a theory because gravity is so much weaker than all the other forces of science. And so their theory for this is that gravity is transmitting itself into these other dimensions. It's spreading itself out in these other dimensions. And so if the brain multiverse theory was correct, which is that all these other universes are stacked on top of each other, that would be an explanation for why gravity is so weak. And this is also a theory, the brain multiverse theory. This theory can be tested using the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, Switzerland. So then there is the quantum multiverse, which the quantum multiverse is that there are particles like atoms that exist in what they call a superposition, which is multiple states at once. But once they measure that particle in any way, the superposition is destroyed. And that collapse is called the collapse of a wave function. Not that you need to know that, just FYI. But to this day, no one knows why it destroys itself when they go to measure it. And so when we measure those particles, all we see is the one reality, and we obviously want to measure it to see the multiple states that it is in. And some scientists have said that just because we see one does not mean that the others don't exist. It's just that when we measure it, it collapses for some reason that we don't know of, but that doesn't disprove the idea that the other universes exist. And basically the outcomes of all this are kind of along the lines of the brain multiverse theory, which is that these are multiverses that are right in front of us. And basically this theory is very interesting because each and every particle that has a superposition, there are countless other, it's like there has to be a reality for each and every particle, which would mean that there are countless yous out there, and they're just in a plethora of other dimensions that are right in front of us. And this theory, in theoretical sense, is real because quantum physics is real. Quantum physics has been proven to work. And then another theory is the math multiverse, which I don't know why this is a thing, but apparently some scientists believe that math is its own universe. Let's move on. And now there is the dark matter universe, which basically some statistics for you are that we make up 4.9% of our universe, and dark matter makes up 26.8% of our universe. And then there's 63.8%, which has absolutely nothing. But the theory here is that we could be sitting on a shadow galaxy and not even know it. That this is another multiverse theory where there is another multiverse that is right in front of us. So now, having said all that, proof of other dimensions existing, proof of heaven, we don't know. It's still, all of these multidimensional theories are just theories. But one thing I noticed while I was studying all of this is that the one dimension that we feel the effects of, that none of these theories work without this, is time. Time is a dimension that we do not see. Time is a dimension that we feel the effects of. We don't know what it is. Science can't necessarily explain it. Science doesn't know what it is. We just can measure I don't even know if they can measure the effects of it. They just say time is. Time is our mental interpretation of our universe, but they don't know what time is. Yet none of these scientific theories, scientific equations work without time. So this idea led me into another really in-depth study that I did about time and about the understanding of time, which also led into another study of free will. But those are different videos that if you want to see those, let me know. But my thought, and this is just a theory, it's just that, is that if there is a supernatural, spiritual realm that exists, I think, and again, I don't know, this is one of those crazy theories that I have in my head, is that it exists inside the dimension of time. And another idea from that for me is that, just one example, is that if you were to go to pray for somebody and they were to be healed, well, at some point they did not have that condition, whatever it was, at some point. And so if you were to pray for them and then they were to be healed, it's like they would either be going backward or forward in time to a time where they didn't have that condition. And there are a lot of other thoughts on that I have. That's just one of them. But what are you guys' thoughts about it? What do you think about all this? What do you think about these multi-dimensions? What do you think about the multiverse? What do you think about all of it? Let me know in the comments and let's talk about it. Let's have discussion. So that is that, and I will see you misfits in the next video. Peace.